I have been doing this hobby for quite a few years now, and before it was Battletech and Warhammer, the modeling that I did was historical, building tanks and airplanes from World War II. And me and my brothers, we would always try to put as much detail and as much realism into these little things, watching YouTubers like Plasmo and Night Shift, and we were just so enthralled with the idea of making something so small look so real. And one of my favorite parts of those historical minis was always building the cockpits of the planes. Something about painting up so much detail and putting so much effort into this one tiny hidden facet of the model was poetic to me. It was like a secret that only I knew. And more to the point of this video, I am in the process of building a Knight Cerastus Acheron from Warhammer 30,000. And some of that historical modeler came out while I was building the cockpit. And I don't know, I was originally only gonna make one big video for this night, but I found myself with almost 2 hours and 30 minutes of footage pertaining just to this cockpit. So I thought it would only be fair to give this cockpit justice by giving it its own little video. So thanks for tuning in, I hope you enjoy, and let's get on to the cockpit. Getting down to business, I've already given the model a blast of gray primer that is older than I am, just about. We got given a bunch of old Citadel paints and models, and surprisingly, it still went on really nice. Anyway, I'm then going to go on and give it a quick zenithal highlight with a white primer that I have, which is much newer. With all of our parts freshly primed, it is time to take stock of the actual cockpit itself. This is not a very big section of the model, but that didn't stop me from taking way too much time on it. I will now be hitting the cockpit with the very conveniently named Vallejo Interior Green, or at least I would be if the last person who used my airbrush actually cleaned it properly. I wonder who that could have been. Anyway, after I got my airbrush cleaned, I began applying the green to the cockpit, and I must say that I was very pleased with how it went on. It's been a minute since I've used this particular green, but I forgot how good Vallejo paints are going over zenithal highlights. They've got pretty decent coverage, but they're pretty thin, so they keep a lot more of the value from the priming stage than other paints, in my opinion. Anyway, moving onwards, I decided that I'd try something a little bit different for this cockpit. I've said it before, but I'll say it again, I do not really know how to do non-metallic metal, but unfortunately the scheme that I've chosen for this Knight requires quite a bit of it, so I figured I'd try to practice it as much as I could in the cockpit. And to get started, I thought I'd just try to paint everything that would not be green in a black color, just to differentiate it. While I am painting this black, I'd figured I'd take the time to let you guys know that the rest of the Knight video proper will be coming out eventually, most likely within the next month, so keep your eyes open for that. But I'd just like to say, to anyone who's ever built and painted one of these things, I respect you a lot, because there's a lot of fear that goes into building one of these things. It's very intimidating, not only because it's so big, but also because you spend so much money on it that you really don't want to mess it up. Anyway, moving on to the non-metallic metal, I am building up my values from darkest to lightest. For this first attempt here, I tried using different colors like a rusty brown in the lowlights and a blue in the highlights, and it didn't really work. I highlighted it all with white, like you usually do with non-metallic metal, and it looks good, but it doesn't exactly read as the shiny silver that I'm looking for. But it was a fine first attempt. For my next attempt on the weird, pipe semicircle behind the chair and the chair itself, I decided to ditch the different colors and just go only for gray. So, similar procedure, I build up using my darkest gray first and building up with lighter and lighter grays until I finally highlight very sparingly with pure white. Also, I would just like to say, if there are any people who are newish to the hobby here, non-metallic metal is the technique of trying to make a section of a model look metallic without actually using silver paint. And the reason for that is for a multitude of factors, but sometimes modeling nerds might just not really like the finish of the metallic paints, or maybe they want to try to make it look better and more like defined. Or sometimes it's just a fun challenge. But anyway, there's no need to worry about any non-metallic metal when you're getting started in the hobby. Anyway, moving on, I will now be painting up a nice green display. And the process here is actually very similar to non-metallic metal, except it uses a little bit more wet blending. Basically, I start out with a darker green and then slowly highlight higher and higher with a lighter green, blending it together into a seamless transition before finally highlighting very sparingly in the middle with some pure white. I didn't put it in the video, but I actually have like 20 minutes of extra footage of me wet blending too much and stripping the terminal down to bare white primer and having to restart all over again. But anyway, after I had gotten a green that I was happy with, I decided to try to freehand a display on the green terminal. And I do this by just drawing two parallel lines, drawing distance increment marks along them, an X in the middle to indicate where the guns are facing, and then just some tactical text with some red and yellows to add a little bit of color to it. And I honestly thought it was a really nice effect, and I was pretty proud of it, even if it was a little crooked. After I was done with the terminal, I decided to try to address these blank green side walls that I had. There wasn't much interesting I could do with them, so I elected to just do some dry brushing with a metallic paint to add a nice chipping effect. I thought it looked nice, so I also decided to add it to the green parts of the terminal and the back seat plate. Speaking of the back seat plate, I figured it's time to paint up the cushions for my little Knight Pilot's Tushin. I'm sorry. But anyway, I decided to use a khaki tan paint to paint up the little pillows. And after that, I decided to hit it all with a nice dark wash to really grim darkify this. And with this wash, the cockpit is more or less done. I decided to assemble it together to kind of see how it's looking, and honestly, I was really happy with it. And now all that's really left is to paint up the little pilot. And I'd like to now call attention to a little detail of the Cerastus Knight kit, and that is that every helmet option for the pilot equates to one of the faceplate options for the different variants of Cerastus Knight. And I thought that that was a really fun detail to basically have like a mini knight within your knight. So I decided to paint him up in the same scheme that I would eventually paint up the Acheron proper. And for any keen-eyed Battletech fans out there that can kind of see what I'm doing with this knight eventually, feel free to leave your prediction down in the comments section down below. Anyway, for the time being, I gave him a Zenithal Highlight Prime, and then I'm going to go in and hit everything that is not armor with a gray to kind of see what I'm working with here. And for the actual armor proper there, I am going with a nice blue. This is a Vallejo Air Color Steel Blue, and it kind of had a weird finish going on top of the Zenithal highlight, but I think that was just an issue with some cold primer coming out a little bit spattery. But anyway, after a couple coats, it ended up looking pretty good. After the blue had mostly dried, I decided to hit it with a little bit of white mixed with blue to give it a little bit of highlights on the helmet and the top of the shoulder pads. After I was satisfied with the highlighted blue, I decided to paint up the random straps that the pilot had on his legs, as well as a few other spots with a nice leather brown. It is now that I bring in the second color of the armor. This scheme calls for about a third of the armor along the side to be painted white, but white is difficult to paint, so I base coat it with gray and then highlight up to it. After the white was dry, I decided it was time to paint up the visor. I chose red because I thought it contrasted the blue quite nicely, so I start off by painting up the visor area purple. Then I paint on some red, blending it along the sides, and then blend up to an extra bright pinkish in the middle to give it that nice glowy effect. Once the visor was dry, I decided to paint this dude with a black wash, and then I called him good. I was so excited to get the pilot into the cockpit that I forgot to click the record button. But anyway, here he is in his seat now, and I am super proud. He looks really good in my opinion. I really like him, but there is only one thing missing, and that thing is object source lighting. Yeah, I know, I'm gonna absolutely ruin him. Anyway, I start off with a nice white to get the glowy, then I put on some acid green, and then I finally finish it off with a darker green in the middle. And I had to repaint the visor, but I also forgot to click record for that. And anyway, I kinda hated the green at first. It really had to glow on me. It really had to grow on me, and but I thought it looked a lot better actually in the Knight Cockpit, and this was still one of the funnest projects that I've ever done. I learned so much from making this, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. This was the entire 2.5-hour process condensed into a 13-minute video, and it was one of the funnest videos I have ever built. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you again, be it in the Knight video, or maybe if there's any Battletech fans in here that are excited to see me, I don't know, maybe paint up some of the new armor boxes that just released, or maybe 4 Urbmechs, anyone? Anyway, that is all. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time.